everyone, and welcome back to Tech Centric, your one-stop shop for understanding how tech and your business relate. I'm your host, Kris Moniz, and with me today are three of the absolute best data architects it has ever been my privilege to work with. We have Pranay Shyam, Josh Higginbotham, and Jeff Alto. And today we are tackling a problem that I have seen far too often over the course of my career, and I have seen it cripple growth in companies, innovation just gets stifled, and all of that has been due to this hidden tax of data silos. And this isn't an IT headache. It is a fundamental liability that creates what we have technically called in the past either tech debt or analytics debt, that creates a gap between the potential value of your data, that what it can do for your company, and the actual insights and value you extract from it. So over the course of my career, as I've said, I've seen this happen a lot. I've worked with dozens of companies in the insurance industry, and having disconnected data across claims, policy, underwriting, it's not an inconvenience. It is a direct threat to profitability and their ability to do risk assessment. The data is there, just the people who need it and need to analyze it and need to use it to make strong underwriting and risk and rate decisions don't have access to it. So our goal today with this conversation is to arm you as an executive with the strategic understanding to break down walls and eliminate analytics debt, and to turn your data from sort of a fragmented liability or a data swamp, I'm sure you've heard a bunch of different ways of it being referred to, into a powerful strategic asset, which is what it should be. So Jeff, question to you. So you've worked with a lot of executives over the years, and you've heard the term data silos. And when they hear that term, we all know they often think, well, that's an IT problem. They've got to go fix it for me. From your perspective, in the past, when you've been talking to C-suite folks and you've had to reframe this as a critical board level strategic problem, how have you explained this concept of analytics debt or tech debt or analytics deficit, and how does it directly cripple a company's ability to compete and innovate?
So, I mean, the big thing when it comes to when you talk about data silos is you've got kind of your, I'll call them operating metrics and the general way that things are going on within that specific part of the business. But unless you have the context from other parts of the business in order to be able to understand the impact throughout the business as a whole, you're not going to be able to make the right decisions to steer the ship. So your insurance example is a good one. The link between policy and claims. Once you've sold your policy, you can't just ignore whether or not you end up paying out against that money. And if things are changing fast, especially when things are changing fast. So you can often get away with it when the world is relatively stable and everything's going on in kind of the same as it has for long periods of time. But especially in today's economy, as things are changing, you need to be able to bring that information together to be able to make those right decisions. And in a lot of cases, when that's required, again, there can be manual efforts to say, I'm going to take this and I'm going to bolt on this. But if you've done that appropriately, you're going to be able to take those correct actions a step ahead of your competitors. And it really is going to make a huge difference in terms of how you can react to the marketplace and be in the right place as things go forward.
As a quick follow-up to that, so if I'm an executive, if I'm a CEO, or heck, if I'm the CIO, and you're coming in there and you're telling me you've got a data silo problem, how are you explaining to that individual how they got here, and kind of putting them at ease with the fact of you're not the only company on the planet with data silos, right? This is a common thing. It's a common outcome, and here's how it frequently happens. And now we just have to deal with it.
I mean, the analytics that are done typically are going to be focused on what's right in front of you at that specific moment, and being able to operate your small fiefdom, if you will. And it's really the situation that's one step above that, where you're bringing data from other areas, and at that higher level, that strategic level, where you're starting to make not just decisions that fix things today, but the direction that you should take for tomorrow, the business decisions that you make in terms of um, priorities for marketing, sales initiatives, product R&D efforts, that kind of stuff. That's where you need that forward-looking information, and that combination that gives you the full context of the marketplace that you're playing in, to be able to help that process. Um, and those aren't the types of analytics that are happening necessarily every day, although they should be happening more. Um, they are kind of at that one step above the day-to-day, which is where those kinds of decisions need to be made.
So basically, what I'm hearing, and kind of a follow up question to Josh here, what I'm hearing is when you started smaller, you kind of built these pockets, your fiefdoms, as you put it, of underwriting works in a silo and it keeps its data and it does the analytics it needs to run its part of the business, and claims does the same thing. But as you get bigger, a byproduct of this is eventually you need to start to pull that stuff together and in ways you never did before. And that's when you figure out, oops, we may have not necessarily designed this the right way. So, Josh, so these silos, they're obviously a byproduct of just a company growing up over time, right? We talked about, you build it, and as you grow and you suddenly decide you need to think more strategically, you realize you've built yourself into a problem. So, what is the real cost of this architectural flub, if you will, and how do you make this a tangible thing for a CFO or a CEO, and to help them understand how much it's costing them and why they need to change?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's something that I've seen in every company that I've ever worked for, you know, since the beginning of my career in IT. Like, it's always been kind of that understanding that, we're aiming to eliminate silos, we're aiming to kind of establish this like single source of truth. Like, we don't like to store data in multiple different locations. It produces the option that there could be issues with quality or just a mismatch in what is being presented to the business or to a customer, things like that. And a lot of it starts from the fact that people scale quickly, like we've already kind of talked a little bit about on this session. You kind of put this in the forefront that we'll get back to it sometime later, whether that's 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. And it usually comes back around because it starts to present itself as a problem. And so, those things can be presented in a couple different ways, or the impact of this to your business could be kind of shown in a couple different ways. It could be productivity loss within your teams because they're having to maintain multiple different solutions or sources of truth, if you will, like their own versions of truth. We see that even in this space where, you know, I customer is my source of truth, like in this location, but it's also the source of truth for another team in this other location.
Yep.
But from an executive level, where the true impact is the credibility that you could lose within your customer base by presenting wrong views of what that data looks like. So it could be that, we've long kind of believed that data is a valuable asset to any organization. In some organizations, it is the asset. And when you start to put out reports that show different values depending on how you look at it, or I have report A that shows one thing, but report B shows another, then that has a direct impact to the credibility of the company. Your customers start to think, is there an issue that isn't being presented? Oh no, I've based some business decisions off of this data. What is true and what is not? And getting back from that can be a very costly exercise and maybe even not a recoverable exercise to go through. And so, keeping this at the forefront, even though like this stuff is hard, like data strategy and data governance and establishing like this unified platform was a very costly endeavor and still is costly today. the technology is advancing quick enough, and it's advancing further than I've seen it historically, to where that's becoming a little bit easier, but it's still a very tough thing to go through. And so it requires the right vision, the right strategy, and even the right partner to be able to kind of bring all that together so that you can keep from those events occurring.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I like the idea of making sure they understand that it's not just about their credibility. It's about you could have made a very, very poor decision and you didn't even know it because you were making it based on bad data
Mm-hmm.
because your underlying ecosystem is just fractious and not dependable. So, yeah, cautionary tale. And sadly, I think everybody on this call has seen it multiple times,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. So I'm going to move us on because, okay, we've talked about the problem, right? The problem's data silos and this overall technical debt or analytical deficit that has been created over time. Let's talk a bit about how we're going to sort of put the design forth to a client to explain this is what you need to be doing. This is the modern way to fix this problem and to set yourself up for a prosperous future where you can make good and on time decisions based on your assets and make the most out of them. And I know we just finished with you, Josh, but I'm gonna go back to you, Josh, one more time because, so the audience may or may not know you're a Microsoft data platform MVP and have been for, I think, 5 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, especially the last 2.5 years or so, you have been very engaged with Microsoft Fabric, which is Microsoft's answer to sort of this unified data platform approach. There's also Snowflake out there and Databricks, and they're all kind of vying for the top spot. But, how does a unified all-in-one platform like Fabric fundamentally sort of get rid of these barriers and help fix data silos as a whole? Walk us through that single source of truth thing. Something, one lake actually looks like X and it empowers the following outcomes. Just help paint a picture for the folks watching as to why modern platforms like this have made this the time you want to fix this if you haven't in the past.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I just stated, which is, this stuff is hard. It's very difficult to get right. Historically, it's required large teams and lots of different components to be able to kind of bring this together. Like we were looking at having to buy a bunch of different various tools, and then, oh no, we got to then upskill in these areas, and then we have to have a dedicated team to support this. And so, a platform like Microsoft Fabric, well, not new to the technology landscape, like that kind of idea of this unified data platform. The way that Microsoft, at least from my opinion, has approached this is, again, to try to solve some of this stuff that we're seeing with silos. So there's always been that mindset, like, let's bring all of our teams together so they're able to collaborate better. Productivity is going to be better because we're not having to jump swivel chair from one tool to another. That's all great, and that's kind of shared across the ecosystem from a data platform stance. Where Fabric seems to be going, that is lending itself to eliminate these silos in a better way, is, Microsoft has designed this from like interconnectivity across these different workspaces to the workloads. All that's kind of brought together where there is no choice but to leverage kind of the one lake. So data engineer me, Josh, is writing data to my lakehouse within Fabric. So is Jeff as a data engineer writing to his. All of it's being presented to the business or to the group through the one lake. There is no real choice to that. Whereas before, I may have a SQL server in, say, East US, and then Jeff has a SQL server out in West US, and unless I have access to that and the admins are kind of looking down on top, you're not going to know that that's out there. One Lake Data Catalog kind of brings that all to the forefront. You know what's there. You have tools like Microsoft Purview, which can, show you data cataloging, data lineage. You can tag things, so it's kind of brought up in a different, like, categorical way. And so Microsoft's designed these solutions that try their best to eliminate. Now, it still requires a person or people to be able to kind of architect that correctly, so it is as available as you would like. But the tooling there now within the Microsoft Fabric ecosystem, was built for that. We can create shortcuts, so we're not having to move data around. Like a lot of the reasons why you end up with data silos is because we just don't have the time. As an engineer, I've got a laundry list of things that I need to get accomplished. I don't want to go through this labor of ETL and the data over to another location, so people just need to come to me to be able to get it.
Yep.
With Fabric, we can just shortcut from that location. So the data lives in blob storage. Let's just shortcut it into Fabric, and now everything lives together. It just makes it really easy, which is cool to see, and it's changing our approach and the way that we communicate with with other technologists in the space, with our clients, and it's just kind of cool to see.
And by the way, thank you for not calling out the SQL Server under my desk. I appreciate that. All right. So obviously, Fabric has its approach to addressing this, and it sounds like, at a minimum, we're saying that this concept of a data lake is at the heart of the modern data architecture. Now, is that a concept that the other two platforms share? So, Pranay, I know you've done work on Snowflake. Jeff, I know you've done work on Databricks. So, Pranay, let's start with you. Snowflake, is it solving this problem in the same way? Is it slightly different?
Right. Great perspective to look at, Kris. One thing I will also start as a concept. So when we talk about data silos are truly a reflection of how business operates, and it organically grows over a period of time. And that's what ends up creating these data silos. And what we are trying to do is we need to combine all the business processes together where they've been successful in their own silo. But for the overall good of the whole enterprise, we are trying to bring all of them together to get the additional value out of the data, which in an information format. So that's the overall concept I think about. The other thing I also think about is we are still bound by the speed of light, and everybody chuckles when I say that, because in case if I want to use something, I need to bring it to the place where I can process this together. So the technology over the period of time have developed. So we talked about data lake. Data lake means I can collect all the data together at one place, and when I need to use it, I can figure out where to go and get the data. Fast forward, and this is a concept, by the way, which has been, I think, early 2000s when the HDFS came out. That's when this concept started becoming more and more popular. That
2006, right?
2006, yeah, the Google
Yeah.
paper. So put data together and we can move it forward from that point onward and we can start using it together. Interesting development in the mid 2015 or so. That's when the compute becoming, so the concept of lakehouse started becoming popular. So the drawback of data lake was you put the data together and then you bring your compute and then move it somewhere where you can process it. What concept of lakehouse did is that you have your data, I will bring my compute, you do not have to move the data, and I can process this over a period of time and what I need to do with it on top of it. Snowflake truly commercialized this thing in a very cloud native solution. So concept of data can be sitting anywhere it wants to be, and you can have access to data. I can control access to the data if I need to, but I will have my own compute and I will bring it to the data and I will do what I need to do with it. So it kind of merged the concept of data lake and lakehouse in a very commercially viable capacity. And the platform is built in a way which allows you to scale in hyper volumes with a very low cost to entry, very low barrier to entry. So you can start with this fast, you can start managing it fast, and there are frameworks now available which allows you to, expand it in a global scale. And not just that, we think about data silos within an organization, which is part of the reflection. But with Snowflake Marketplace, what it's also doing is that I, as a partner, I want to share data outward. So data becomes a commodity for me, which I can share or sell as a service to my external clients, to my peers, or even part of my organization. So with data marketplace, I can allow them to share the data, look at the data without having to move the data and use the data in a very confined, controlled manner. So
just for the listeners at home who may not know, what is the Snowflake Data Marketplace?
So Snowflake Data Marketplace is their service in which any company can create a data product and share it with their customers. So think about I have a great data set. Let's take an example of, Equifax or credit reporting. In the past,
Yeah.
anybody who has done any kind of reporting on that, you get periodic cube credit cube download, and it takes a lot of processing time to decompress that, and it's at 700, 800 data elements, and do anything you want to do with it. So instead of doing that, all these agencies can actually share their data, and people can subscribe from that service and get the data they want to use. So ready to use available data without wasting data power, without having to move all these giant data sets all over the place and then try to do anything. Weather data, and there are all sorts of data which is publicly available and ready to use, which allows us to truly break data silos, not within just an organization, but globally.
Okay. So yeah, it is started out as the same approach, but it's certainly expanded in a way that Fabric didn't. Interesting. Jeff, what about for Databricks? How is Databricks handling this problem? Is it closer to, Fabric in one lake, or closer to Snowflake, or is it its own animal?
Yeah, I think it's to some extent in between. Again,
Okay.
the shared Delta Lake format does really make it a platform that has the ability to scale and do the enterprise grade analytics that people are looking for. It also has the ability to be multi-platform, so you can host that within an Azure environment, or you can host it within AWS or other places where the infrastructure is just kind of underneath the covers. I think what they've done an exceptional job of is really building out their tooling to meet the technical needs of their underlying users. I guess the way that I look at it is Snowflake is a little bit more polished and aiming at the audiences like you're talking about with the marketplace for pretty and useful that way, whereas Databricks has done a great job at extending their tools. They're a little bit ahead, I would say, on the AI front in terms of integrated tooling to be able to do some analytics on that side of things. Fabric, I think, is just started a little bit behind. I think Fabric probably wants to be Databricks when it grows up, just so that it has the ability to kind of catch up to those
Fighting
tools.
words.
But
SmackDown 2.0, here we come.
No, I'm heading to Boston later this week.
yeah, there we go. But it really is. I think where things stand right now, we've got a ton of demand for Databricks, and that kind of work seems to be best in breed in terms of its current right now capabilities, and the customers that are using it are really getting a lot out of it. So can't complain.
Yeah, it's funny. I've heard multiple times it's sort of described in these three different ways of, if you want the absolute bleeding edge with all the latest features and you're willing to pay the overhead costs to go with that, you want Databricks. If you want the ability to just have hyper scaled amounts of data, to just petabytes of data that are going to just perform all day, you probably want Snowflake. But if you're looking for a system for the average company that's not going to cost you an arm and a leg and that's just going to work, you probably want Fabric. Sounds very similar to what I'm hearing from you guys here. So interesting. So obviously we've got to talk about the elephant in the room though, right? So we know what the problem is. We know there's architectural approaches and platforms that leverage those architectural approaches to solve these problems. When it comes to executing and making this stuff happen, so Pranay, this is for you. So all of this is theory, and I know for the folks in this group here, this is reality. You've done these sorts of things multiple times, but for an executive, I talk to them frequently. They're very concerned about the risk of failed execution, failed adoption, etc. So, a skeptic could, and I've had this question before, as I'm sure you guys have, asked the question of, well, great, it's a new platform. You're basically just asking me to move my mess from over here and put it over here. And while I'm doing it, I'm just going to create something that costs more and doesn't get me additional functionality. And they hear catchphrases, data swamp and stuff like that, and they're going, I don't think this is for me. So, given that you've implemented lots of large scale systems like this, especially in healthcare, HIPAA compliance concerns, et cetera, what are some of the critical areas around governance, security, and overall compliance that an executive really needs to champion to make sure that the project delivers the trusted outcomes that people are looking for?
It's an absolute $1 million question, I should say. 'Cause it starts with the strategy. Um, the failures of the past should be the teaching moments for us. So the failures of implementation of data lakes, where we said it's a data collection place, you just throw data without any governance, without knowing anything, and then spend a lot of money in collecting data, and then you figure out you can't really use it. So um, what we have learned over a period of time is that you have to have the right level of principle, the right level of guidance to create your architecture, and that starts with the strategy. You have to have a strategy. What is that? What you're trying to do? What is the overall aim of the organization? What's the business value of the organization? Now, once you have identified those things, there are certain very core basic principles which we say nowadays we call it principle of Mendelian architecture, which are universally applied. If you follow those principles, the chances for you getting into a very specific situation are less. They're still there, but they're less. So principles like your data collection should be greedy and unbiased. It's a principle. It's a very easy to understand, and it's so simple. It just boggles my mind. People don't think about it up till they hear it. So when you're talking about your bronze layer, where that's a data collection layer, that's a layer where, except for very few people, don't necessarily get access to it. When we're creating that kind of a layer, we need to make sure the ingestion piece of the method we bring the data in is as efficient as possible, as low effort as possible. And if I'm tapping a well, I'm tapping a data well to bring the data in, I want to bring as much data as possible. As I said, this is a layer which is very controlled. It is for creating your data landscape. This is the warehouse. This is the true warehouse where you are collecting data and from which you can pick it up. Um, and then from there to silver layer and all that. So there are principles around those layers as well, which you follow. And as long as you follow them, you will have a very secure landscape and an ecosystem which is going to scale, perform, and not going to cost you an arm and a leg. Now, I'm going to talk about a little bit about Snowflake. That's where it started, right? Uh, because the level of compute and your storage is different, you truly can use external resources, external services to collect the data without having ever or have a very minimal compute cost from Snowflake. So you can build your bronze layer without costing a lot, allowing your data to be stored and stay there. And that's when you start processing, you start scaling it up. Um, you talk about HIPAA compliance and other security compliance all over the place. These platforms are compliant and their certification available for them. Doesn't matter which Azure or cloud platform they live on, their certification available for them. One thing I do would like our executive to know is that understand your compliance footprint, your compliance requirement. Uh, as these platforms are growing, some of the high FedRAMP level securities are not available in every single platform, or they are behind in the region. So there is certain level of research, which again becomes part of your strategy. Those research needs to be done, and if they're compliant, sooner or later, all these platforms will become compliant. That's not a question. It's just that between now and then, what it takes and what do I need to do these things.
So Pranay makes a really good point talking about the execution of the platform itself. But Jeff, for you, you've done a lot of specific work on cost optimization in the cloud. How do you assure clients that they're going to get a clear return on this investment? What types of activities should they be looking into performing to make sure this doesn't turn into a runaway train of infrastructure costs that they just can't get their arms around?
I mean, the biggest thing is just visibility. So making sure that you have your arms around your spend on a day-to-day basis. It's very easy, especially depending upon what you're running, to spend a lot of money very quickly, and making sure that you can see that when it's happening, and also having line of sight to the various resources within your data environment and the efforts that are going on to basically leverage those resources for your sales efforts or for cutting down costs, or being able to draw that line and do that analysis is really going to give you the decision points to be able to say, this is something that we want to keep doing and doing more of, or this is something where we need to change our approach because the return on the amount of spend that we have associated with that effort isn't where it needs to be. So it really is a matter of both kind of that visibility and the ability to pivot when you do see some of these things come up, and make the right decision for that. Because again, we talked about this before, but the world is going to change very, very quickly, and our ability to react to that and make the right decisions is super important. And that's just one more tool in your belt to be able to make it a database decision as to this is something that's making money, or this is something that's not worth the investment.
That's a good call out. It's not just about the spend; it's about what is that spend buying me,
Right.
and is it costing me way more on the spend side of that calculation than I ever expected, and hence the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Yep.
Which is real important at the end of the day.
Right.
So at the end of all this, it sounds like we got to distill our entire conversation here down into an actionable takeaway for the audience. So I think I really want to leave the audience and all the executives listening with 3 key questions they should take back to their organizations. So if you are considering or are in the middle of a data modernization initiative, these are sort of the core questions you need to be asking your teams. The first one is sort of the why, the value question. And that is, have we moved beyond anecdotes and, truly quantifiable and understood cost structures of the current data silos that are in place? And do we know what the measurable business value is in terms of revenue growth, operational efficiency, risk reduction that we are committing to unlock with this initiative that's going to eradicate those data silos? So at the end of the day, do I know what it's costing me now? And do I know what I'm going to save and additional value I'm going to generate if I fix it? The second one is the architecture question. Okay, how am I going to do this, right? How specifically does our proposed approach actively attack the existing technological and process silos that we have? So, show me how it creates a collaborative environment and a single source of truth, rather than just, lifting and shifting our old platform into a new, more expensive cloud-based location, right? So prove to me that your solution is the right solution to the problem. And then lastly is the what if question, which is all about your ROI. So what is our comprehensive executive sponsor level plan for governance, security, and financial management? How are we going to ensure that the data is trusted, the platform is secure, and the consumption costs are managed, guaranteeing this investment yields a clear and defensible return? So again, it's what do I think my value generation is going to be to fix this? How can I prove that how I'm going to fix it is the right solution? And what is the approach I'm going to take to make sure it is governed, secure, and fiscally responsible, that I will get the return on investment that I've used to justify doing this in the first place? Well, thank you so much for joining me today here, folks. It's been great chatting with you about this. And for the audience at home, thank you for watching. If you have any questions for myself or any of my guests here, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, as we'll continue to have more content like this coming out soon. Bye, everybody.